Before I get into this video, I just want to start off by saying that the US is by no means our final destination. When my girlfriend and I booked our tickets to come here to the US, we booked round-trip tickets. Okay, this is not where we're going to stay. Now, whether we're going back to Europe or to another continent, that remains up in the air. That remains to be seen. Because while honestly, personally, I'd prefer to go back to Europe, and I suspect my girlfriend would as well, we also want to do what's in the best interest of our future selves, financially, and also just from a growth standpoint, being able to expose ourselves to unfamiliar cultural demographics. So we'll see what happens with that once our time here in the US is up. But on the topic of demographics, the first reverse culture shock that I've experienced being back here in the US for 3 weeks is the demographics. So I spent the majority of my time in Europe, in the Netherlands. I spent 14 months living in the Netherlands and just observing the demographics and the dynamics that accompany them. And what I found was that in the Netherlands, these are the demographics that I personally observed. And statistically, factually, this could be completely incorrect. Correct me if I'm wrong, because if you're Dutch, you probably know more about this than I do. That said, the demographics that I saw out there were, for starters, ethnically Dutch people. So this is your white Dutch person, typical white Dutch person. That's of course the majority demographic in the Netherlands. After that was probably Turkish people. I saw a lot of Turkish people out there, a lot of Moroccan people as well. So people coming from sort of the Middle East and North Africa, just that general region of the world. I saw a lot of Polish people, and personally, I can't really distinguish between Polish people and Dutch people, German people, Belgians, etc. But I did see a lot of Polish license plates, which led me to the conclusion that there are a lot of Polish people in the Netherlands. Could be wrong about that, maybe they were just passing through, but again, I'm just going based on what I saw. The point that I'm making is I was seeing demographics of people that I had never previously been exposed to growing up here in the US, and in particular in the Dallas-Fort Worth region. Here in Dallas, the most prominent demographics that you'll come across, and this has sort of evolved over time. I feel like maybe when we first moved here, it was probably primarily white, Hispanic, and black in that order. And by black, I'm referring to African Americans. Oh, and by the way, in the Netherlands, there were also quite a few Surinamese people, a lot of people from the ABC Islands, and people from, I suspect, East African countries, just based on their facial features. But here in the US, in Dallas, the demographics that stand out the most to me, being in Texas, are Hispanics and Indians. So, of course, this varies quite a bit depending on what part of the US you're in. But here in Dallas, again, that's my reference point. That's where I've been for the entirety of these 3 weeks. And we'll get to explore more places here in the coming days. But the primary demographics that I've seen have been Hispanic / Latino, I should say. Not just Hispanic people, but people from South and Central America. So that could be Mexico, that could be literally any country in South America, or, like I said, a country where they primarily speak Spanish, but still on the American continent. And I think the biggest change has been that there are a lot more Indian people here. Now, I think a lot of these people were probably born and raised here in the US, so really they're Indian Americans, but these communities tend to sort of flock with one another, especially the Indian community here, I've noticed, is very tight-knit. And honestly, look, I'm not one to make these vast stereotypes based on purely racial or ethnic discrepancies or distinctions, but Indian people out here, I would not be surprised if they are the highest earning demographic in the DFW area. I've literally, to this day, I'm 25 years old, I grew up here in DFW. I have never seen a poor Indian person in my whole entire life. So, generally speaking, Indian people here tend to flock to the higher income communities. They tend to live in those gated communities that I've talked about in recent videos, or just generally affluent areas, especially areas with good schooling. And they're just crushing it. I mean, they're absolutely crushing it. And I think that that demographic kind of serves as a reminder of what the American dream is supposed to be. But that's a different topic for a different day. I'll talk more about my views on the American dream in another video. But I will say that being in the Netherlands, I maybe saw a few Indian people, and I'm pretty sure I didn't see any people from at least Mexico. A lot of the Hispanic/Latino people that I mentioned earlier are from Mexico. And then a smaller demographic are from some of the other countries. But I don't know if I saw a single Mexican person while I was in Europe, my whole entire time there. And I'm not saying this is a good or bad thing. It's just very different. It's very different, and it changes the dynamic, because being here in Texas and even in places like California, Arizona, Nevada, you can feel the Mexican influence on the culture in the food that people eat, in the clothes that people wear. They're really intertwined. And even going around to the stores, when a sign says something in English, the second language is always Spanish. So that's definitely been very interesting to see. Now, on the topic of racial demographics, the next thing that has served as a reverse culture shock, being back here in the US, is the racial tension. Now, this is undoubtedly a negative thing. Nobody wants to experience racial tension. Or maybe they do, because it seems like Americans are addicted to racial tension and just race overall. Now, things have sort of heightened in the previous months, because literally, I think the day after we arrived back here in DFW, there was an incident that occurred at a track meet. And I think I've talked about this in a previous video, but if you didn't watch that video, I'll just touch on it again really quickly. So basically, there was a school track meet, and there were two 17-year-olds that got into an altercation regarding the seating arrangements. So basically, I guess one of them was in the wrong seating area. He was in the seating area that's designated for the other school that the other student went to. This caused a big issue, and it created a physical altercation, and ultimately one of the kids ended up stabbing and killing the other one. So now one 17-year-old is dead, and the other one is maybe facing a life sentence in prison over seats, which, I mean, it's crazy, but that's not the point of this story. The kid who killed him is a black kid. And I'm calling them kids because that's what they are. 17 years old, you're still a kid in my book. And maybe if you're watching this and you're a lot older than me, you might think I'm a kid. I don't know. I'm a grown man as far as I'm concerned. But anyways, the kid who died was a white kid. Now, if you weren't really in tune with what was going on in the US over the past really few generations, if we're being honest, but especially over the past decade or so, there have been a lot of protests, Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, all of these conflicting ideals regarding race, and this was no exception. So basically, a few days ago, they held a White Lives Matter rally in the city in which the incident occurred, the city called Frisco, Texas, a very affluent area, by the way, very, very affluent area. And look, I'm of the belief that Black Lives Matter, White Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, they all have their own justification. They have their own validity within their ideals. But this White Lives Matter movement was basically founded on the principle of white supremacy. Okay, now I'm not saying the whole movement itself is predicated on that, but this particular rally, I should have said, was predicated on white supremacy. And basically, it got to the point where the father of the kid who was killed told the people who were rallying, don't involve his son and his son's name and legacy in their political movement. And they took offense to that, and they started getting on him. Imagine getting on the father of someone who just lost their son, their 17-year-old son, because he doesn't want his child to be a part of a hate movement. And look, I've seen sightings of people having the white power symbol. It's basically this white lightning bolt on their cars and motorcycles and things like that. And look, that stuff was probably always present, but I think that now with the political environment, people are feeling a bit more empowered to quote unquote speak their truths. And look, we need to have conversations about this stuff because clearly people are suppressing a lot of anger, resentment, and hate, and that never does any good for society. But I don't know. It definitely made me feel uncomfortable to hear that these things are happening literally within a 25-minute drive of where I'm currently walking. Now, on the topic of politics, the next reverse culture shock for me has been the political climate here in the US. And look, in previous videos, I've said that I'm apolitical. The reason why I say I'm apolitical is because, truthfully, I'm not the most politically astute person. So I can't sit here and talk to you about policy and things like that because I don't know all of the technical components. I'm not a student of that game. It's not something that I find interesting enough to really delve into. However, I do have my own set of beliefs. Me being apolitical does not mean that I don't have beliefs. And what I've realized, having returned to the US and having filmed these videos and having listened back to myself as I edit these videos, I've realized that I am a left-leaning person by all accounts. And realistically, I don't think that anybody who isn't left-leaning would really enjoy being in Europe all that much, especially a country like the Netherlands. So really, the writing was on the wall from the time that I took that flight to the Netherlands, that one-way flight at that. But look, I'm gonna be completely honest with you. I don't understand for the life of me how Trump ended up becoming president. I truly don't understand it. Now look, I know that a lot of people have a lot of fear about speaking out about these things. I have freedom of speech. Okay, I'm gonna say whatever I want to say, especially because I am a citizen of this country. I do not understand how Trump, just logically, how Trump ended up becoming president again. Because, look, disregarding my own political beliefs, obviously, me being left-leaning, I am not a big supporter of Trump by any means, at all. I'm not a big supporter of him. But what I don't understand is, it seemed like at the end of his previous term, the American populace wasn't really holding him in a favorable regard, a favorable light. So I don't understand what transpired in the past 4 years that was able to sway people so heavily. I mean, I don't know too much about Biden or the policies he implemented or how he really impacted the country because I was so focused on what I had going on that I wasn't following politics. Again, that's just not something that I really do. But let me go ahead and sit down because we need to really have a real discussion about this. I don't understand what swayed the American opinion toward Trump again. I just don't get it. Now, I will say that as an entrepreneur, Trump understands marketing. That is one thing that I can say about him. He understands marketing. He understands how to rile people up based on their negative emotions. And I don't think that's a secret. Anybody who has any marketing knowledge or human psychology knowledge can see this. But, I mean, does half of the American population really not understand human psychology, or am I just missing something? I don't get it. I don't really understand how they let that man into office. I just don't understand it. Now again, I think that everyone is entitled to their own beliefs. If you support Trump, if you voted for him, I don't see you as less of a person because of it. I would actually like for you to explain in the comments why you did that. And look, other people are probably going to judge you for doing it in the comments. That's just what it is. But I'm not going to judge you. I'm genuinely curious as to why you felt compelled, why you saw Trump and thought, that is who I want representing me in worldly affairs. I just don't understand it. Or maybe you see the president in a different light than I do, because that's how I see the role of the United States president. That is my representative in worldly affairs. And I don't think President Trump is a good representation of me and my ideals. I just don't think so. But anyways, the next thing that has served as a major reverse culture shock for me, being back in the US, is the prevalence of religion. And really, this right here might actually be the answer to the question that I was just asking as to why so many people felt compelled to vote for Trump. Let's be real. Conservatives, people who lean to the right, tend to be more religious. They tend to operate on a religious basis. And I don't know if you've noticed, but throughout the video, I was walking around this church. I don't know how long it took me to walk around this church, but that was just one lap. This is a very, very big church. In fact, I'm gonna walk back toward the front of the church so you can see how big it actually is. Now, to be fair, there are a lot of churches in Europe as well, and there are religious people there, but it seems like people in Europe are far less likely to push their religious agendas onto other people, in my experience. Not saying it doesn't happen, I'm just saying that I personally never saw it. Because here, I mean, I'm seeing bumper stickers, I'm seeing signs in front of people's houses, I'm seeing all kinds of, I don't want to call it propaganda, because again, everyone is entitled to their own belief systems, and there is validity in every belief system. But it feels like in Europe, being religious is a personal affair. It has nothing to do with anybody else. And really, if I'm being honest, I mentioned that there was a lot of racial tension here in the US, but there's actually a lot of ethnical tension in Europe. Because, again, a lot of people in Europe, a lot of the immigrants in Europe are coming from the Middle East. And Middle Eastern countries, by and large, tend to be Muslim. They tend to be rooted in Islam. And this has created a lot of friction between the European cultural customs and the Islamic or Middle Eastern cultural customs. So there has been a lot of friction in that regard. But hold on real quick. This right here is just a regular old church here in the US. Maybe this is a bit bigger than usual, but I mean, I don't think I ever saw a church this big in Europe, unless it was literally a historical landmark of sorts. I mean, it's absolutely insane. And people here, they are pushing their religion onto other people. And look, it doesn't really matter if it's Christianity or Islam, Judaism, whatever religion it may be. I think that people should sort of keep that stuff to themselves. It's okay if you want to represent for your religion, but you shouldn't expect other people to conform to the customs that you abide by just because you choose to abide by them.